Have you heard of the Kaizen process? It's a proactive process that helps leaders and teams solve problems before they happen. On this episode, Hilary Corna draws on her experience with the Kaizen process as a former senior executive officer for Toyota to show us how any business can stay ahead of the curve and the competition.
Welcome back to the Leverage webinar and podcast. Today we have a very special guest. It is a personal friend, mentor, advisor, colleague, Hilary Corna. And just to give a quick background, I'm going to let her do a much deeper introduction, but she is the author of One White Face, this book right here, for all those watching this live or on video. We have a lot in common. We both lived in Japan actually during the same time period, which is kind of random. And we met, a year ago now at Vern Harnish's Scale Up event where you were a speaker and you did a great job and we hit it off after the event. So this is a really special webinar for me and I'm excited to hear what you have to say. So thank you for joining, Hilary.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll give a little bit of background of just my expertise and experience. So my career started in Singapore. Singapore is the Asian regional office for Toyota. Toyota's headquarters is obviously in Japan, but marketing and sales for 14 different countries is managed out of Singapore. So I was hired as senior executive officer and Kaizen leader for the 14 Asian countries that we managed, which essentially translated to I ran all Kaizen operation projects for the region. If you haven't heard of Kaizen, we'll probably go through that briefly, but essentially it's everything that has to do with process improvement within the operations of the dealerships. So that has become really popular here in the States over the last decade, a lot because of Eric Rie's book.
Lean Startup.
Lean Startup. I've got quite a few of the Toyota books up here that have become famous here in the US. But Kaizen as a whole and process improvement, Lean, Six Sigma, all these buzzwords that you hear around Kaizen all encompass the same thing, which is process improvement. And so that's what I did for Toyota in the Asia-Pac region.
And if for all those listening, if you've never read the book, The Toyota Way, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It was written, I don't know when it was written, but so much of it is still relevant today, which is rare for a book with how fast things are changing in the world. For a book to kind of hold the test of time says something about it. And that was honestly a big reason why, after reading that book, so much of it was already in the way that I was thinking about how a company should run, which was why, when we went through a big company restructuring in October, you were at top of mind to come in because I knew that the way that you think and, everything that you teach and practice with Kaizen was really what we needed as a company. Because before you, we had no accountability, no structure, no goal setting, and I setting and accountability that we found like a really beautiful balance there where it's not micromanaging and it's not used as a way to stress people out, but it's a way to kind of keep people motivated and more like self-acknowledgement than micromanagement, I think we were able to achieve. But yeah, all the work that you helped us with really transformed the way that we operated.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So anyway, can we go a little bit deeper on what is Kaizen? I mean, it means continual improvement, right? If you translate it.
Yeah. So I'd be curious for anyone who's in the room, if you want to just put in the chat box, have you had any experience with Kaizen or process improvement or Lean, Six Sigma, Kanban system, just in time, any of this stuff in any of your industries? Just write a quick note there and let us know, and I'll touch on it if we get to it. So Kaizen as a whole is a philosophy. When you join Toyota, it's in everything that you get as a new employee. It's in the quarterly retreats that we have. It's in the annual planning meetings that we have. It's in the performance reviews. It infiltrates everything that Toyota does. The exact translation of Kaizen, Zen means for the better. So you guys have heard of probably Zen before, like Zen Buddhism. Kai means change. So together they mean change for the better. As a whole, when we that ends up being translated to the US, people just caught on to this concept of continuous improvement. So it's the idea that most companies, they're going along, floating through the year, hoping to survive, and they don't change until something goes wrong. And then they're like, oh crap, we need to change. Let's change. And then they're floating, just surviving. And then it's not until something goes wrong, they're like, oh crap, let's change. Whereas the idea of Kaizen is that if you're incrementally changing over time, instead of having really extreme changes, you're having small changes, that you're actually ahead of the curve, ahead of competition, rather than behind and reacting to change. So that's the concept as a whole. As far as pragmatically what we did, the automotive industry as a whole is really, really behind in the South Pacific. It's nothing like the US. It's not very mature or advanced as a market. And so as a result of that, clients are very disloyal. They don't have brand commitment like we do in the US. In the US, we say things like, we're a Honda family or we're a Toyota family. In Asia, they don't have that yet. And so as a result, there's an opportunity for a company to go in and really set the standard and set the benchmark. So Toyota hires a team of people that are essentially like internal consultants, although Toyota would never use that word, consultant. And we have a whole division that's given a very large budget to go out into the field and help develop new operations. So we would get assigned a dealership, and we'd work with two other teams. So we'd work with us from headquarters, the distributor, and then people from the actual dealership. So we'd come together between 7 to 10 people, and we'd work on a project for about a year and a half in one dealership. And that dealership we would call a Pika Pika dealer, which means shining dealership in Japanese, which essentially means like a pilot program. And we would develop new ideas for the operation. So we'd identify a problem, we'd try to quantify that problem, and then we would fix it. And that would take about 3 to 6 months. So for example, in the Philippines, one of the first projects we dealt with was on-time delivery. When we finally figured out where the problem lied in the process, we fixed it. We reduced on-time delivery, increased on-time delivery by over 80%. When before it was costing the company over $1 million in lost sales. And that whole project took about 9 months just to figure that out and get the results that we wanted. When that process was successful, then we standardized it, which meant we made it mandatory, and we implemented all the SOPs that were necessary for people to follow. And then we spread it to other countries. So we took it to Indonesia and Thailand. So pragmatically, that's what we were. We were like internal consultants that went in, did the dirty work to improve the process and be ahead of the curve with competition.
Yeah, that's great. Is there, in your experience, like with outside of Toyota, when you work with companies, is there some common issue that you find in companies? Like obviously like Kaizen is, I'm guessing, not used in 99% of companies. So I'm guessing when people hire you, it's not to enhance Kaizen, it's to implement Kaizen for the most part, I would guess. But is there some common issues that you find like that the bulk of people you work with are experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the first one is jumping to the solution instead of really understanding the problem. So people, if they get an influx in customer complaints, they'll just say, okay, survey the clients or something. The problem is, the solution is not really thorough or thought through. So it's not addressing any core root cause at all. And sometimes problems are problems of problems. So by that time they've snowballed. So if you imagine like a tree, and a tree has many, many leaves on it, but if you only address the final leaf on the final branch of the twig of the tree, you still have all these other leaves behind the scenes. And that's typically what happens with companies, is they solve problems. They just kind of throw darts at the board and hope that one works. But unless you thoroughly understand and quantify the problem, then you don't know what solution will work. So I would say part 2 of that is quantifying the problem. So people go by gut instinct, like Monday morning, wakes up, VIP client complains, or you have a fulfillment issue, and suddenly it's like putting out a fire all day. And so it feels like that's the most important problem in the world, and it feels like that problem happens all the time. But maybe that's the only problem that's occurred, or maybe that only that client is being a jerk. We all know that, like, sometimes we have clients that are really loud clients. So it feels like it really hurts a lot and it's a big problem, but it's just one person or one time. So quantifying the problem is another big thing I see people don't do. They don't try to figure out how often does that problem actually happen, how big of a problem it actually is.
Yeah, and what's been super helpful with us is kind of taking your experience with Toyota and Kaizen, and then using little bits and pieces from other methodologies like traction, right? And now we're doing rocks and scorecards, and we're kind of mixing it also with like agile software development with the points, but we're doing it in a way where people can self-direct, and we're just kind of more in a coaching position rather than in a like, hey, I'm the boss and this is what you have to do, and why didn't you do that? Which is interesting because kind of you bring like the human element to what we were already strong at, which is like the technology, and like we were already very focused on, you know, process documentation and automation, right? But we were kind of missing this whole, how do you know you're solving the right problem, or how do you go about solving a problem or thinking about a problem in the first place? You know, we're really good at implementing solutions, but all that stuff beforehand was not the process of creating process is what we're missing, right?
Yeah. So I like to say I teach people like how to be better problem solvers. Because businesses are solving problems all day. If someone shows up too late to work, how do you solve that problem? Well, you go back to the process, right? I mean, it can be anything, but we're solving problems all day. It's just, are you solving a problem in a way that's really effective? It's easy to get caught up in feeling like we're getting things done. And so that's part of the Kaizen process. We've got tools that support all of that, and we teach people how to solve problems more effectively and really slow down to build that into the day-to-day ops, so that it's how they work, not just what they're working on.
Is 5 Whys part of the Toyota thinking? Because that's something that we've done from the beginning, which is when there's an issue with a client task, they have to fill out a 5 Whys form, which basically asks the question why 5 times. And the idea is it gets to the bottom of it, right? Why was the client upset? Well, because we did on time. Usually end again, well, why wasn't it delivered on time? Well, because things got delayed here. Well, why was that? And eventually, like, you get to the core, which is, I'm not good at scheduling and I didn't leave enough buffer. And going forward, I'm going to give an extra 15 minutes before and after a meeting. Is that something that's part of the Toyota that came out of Toyota?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a process called PDCA, and that falls under the first P, which is plan. And PDCA stands for plan, do, check, act. So essentially, it's like you do cycles of PDCA. So planning up to root cause analysis, so developing the countermeasure as well. And then doing is actually implementing, checking is monitoring the results, and action is standardization. So I see a lot of mistakes in companies where they get caught up in the D. They don't want to do any of the P. They just want to do. And then I also see mistakes around C where people don't monitor the results. I mean, how many times a day do we make changes to the process or decide to change something and we feel good because we're getting things done, but we don't check, did that actually change the results or not? And it's hard because then it takes time and you got to figure out what results to actually check. But at the end of the day, if you're doing all these good work and good activity, you want to know that it breeds results. And people strive on that too. So even employees want to know that their work is having an impact. So you can show that in numbers through Kaizen rather than just guessing.
How do you balance? I would imagine that the strategy of like how, because you can go like infinitely deep with things, right? It's a little bit subjective when you say, okay, we've gotten to the core. Because like I feel like you can, you instead of stopping at 5 whys, you could go to 10 whys and probably maybe get something different. Have you found that you, based on where a company is at in their life cycle, like if you're an early stage startup where speed is so critical that you don't have the luxury sometimes of getting as deep to the core as, say, like a Toyota, which has the luxury of having a massive budget and, you know, they have so much revenue coming in that you can take a year to figure out a problem. But, you know, if you're a 6-month-old company and you're, you know, negative cash flow, you know, I think you have to take that into account too. No. So how do you balance that when you're teaching Kaizen?
Yeah, for sure. So you take on smaller projects. So for example, the one we did in Toyota that took about a year, the delivery process is intense. You've got so much going on. When you're delivering a brand new car, you have many people involved. You have a lot of money involved. You don't need to tackle such a huge process like that. So I would say start small. There's actually a image I was hoping to show. Can I share my screen here?
Yeah. I mean,
okay, let me pull this up. And
people that are live or watching the video podcast or the Wistia will be able to see it.
Okay, great.
And by the way, anyone listening right now that's live, if you have any questions, feel free to hit the ask a question and we can ask Hilary whatever you like.
Can you see this on your end, Nick?
Lean Six Sigma?
Yeah, great. So this image shows a breakdown of different types of projects that you can do within the company. So obviously you see quick wins, process improvement, process design, process redesign, and infrastructure implementation. So this is a company that I've partnered with in the past that does phenomenal, very affordable online training. So I'd highly recommend it for anyone that wants to just dip their feet into this. But this is essentially a step-by-step image that shows how deep you can get into different Kaizen projects. So to address your question, Nick, like typically with startups or young companies, we work in just the blue and pink area. Things that are a simple solution to a known issue, or the root cause is pretty simple or within one department. As far as like process improvement, this is a bit more when you already have a solid product, you already are measuring, you have your KPI that you're measuring week to week or month to month, and you want to take some activity to improve that. So it might be lead time within a waiting area or lead time to pick up a call, things like that, or even defects or issues, as you see here that they have listed. And then the other qualitative part is that the cause of the issue is pretty unknown. So this is like the first level of actual Kaizen. These other three, I barely even touch on when it comes to like younger companies or startups. So process design sometimes, process redesign almost never, and infrastructure implementation almost never. So these are just for companies that already have like very intense existing processes that need either redesigned or like completely new infrastructure. So process design is something like when we work together in client success, like starting something from scratch where there's no existing process and you have to set the initial KPI that you want to measure and also better understand like the voice of the customer and what that process should be designed to look like. So Does this help you give like have an image of different stages of processes based on the type?
Yeah. And Keenan in the chat is asking if he could get this PDF. Do you mind to share it in the
Oh yeah, sure.
Leverage members channel in Slack?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. What's
so I'd encourage
between Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma and the Toyota way? Did Six Sigma kind of spin off out of Toyota principles?
So let me pull this out now and go back. So great question. A lot of people don't know the answer to this. So in Lean Six or in Toyota, we don't use the words Six Sigma and Lean very often. Those have been kind of buzzwords that have been created by the West. But the difference between Lean and Six Sigma is Lean is they both believe the same thing, which is you can cut waste from a process. The difference is their belief systems around how. So Six Sigma is obviously statistical. Nick, you know this from your experience. Six Sigma is about statistics, or comes from statistics. So Six Sigma believes that you cut waste by reducing variation in the process. So let's say you go to your favorite restaurant, right? Sometimes you have no wait. Sometimes there's a long wait. Sometimes you wait at the bar. Sometimes you wait in the lounge. And from a customer's point of view, that variation of the experience is frustrating. So Six Sigma believes you reduce waste by reducing variation. Lean believes you reduce waste by streamlining. So Lean believes if you have a process from here to here, that there's waste because you need to cut things out or there's additional steps that aren't necessary.
High correlation between the two, because the fewer the steps, the fewer the odds of a misstep, which should reduce the variance. So I think
exactly,
there's a strong relationship between the two. When you say Lean, I've heard Lean. I think I recall from the book they talked about lean manufacturing is what they called it. Is that what you're talking about when you say Lean, or is that different?
From the Toyota Way book, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I thought that they were, when they said the word lean, I thought they were calling the way Toyota worked to be called lean manufacturing. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's just in Japanese, we don't have the word lean. So it's like, it's kind of one of these just caught in like lost in translation things. But yeah, I mean, essentially it's all about cutting waste. That's how Toyota looks at it. The word in Japanese is muda. And muda means waste, and there's different types of waste. If you guys want, I actually have another visual that shows that. Do you want me to pull that up?
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
That'd be awesome. I mean, the concept of with Six Sigma, just like always reducing variance. I mean, you can interpret that, right? Because I could get a variance of 0 by constantly doing something simple and wrong. Like I could invite everyone to the wrong calendar invite for this webinar every single week. And the variance is very low because it's always the same wrong link. So, I mean, I'm just trying to poke holes at things, but.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can go back and forth. We could talk about Kaizen and Lean and Six Sigma for days. So this is definitely scratching the surface, but at least it'll give you guys a better perspective, at least to start. Can you see the screen from your end?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So this is also from GoLean6Sigma.com. Phenomenal organization. I've never seen any company do it better than them. And this talks about different types of waste. So in Japanese, we say muda, but essentially you can see here, there's many ways to quantify the problem. So to begin, there's defects, right? When someone sends you an email and they reply back and you have to repeat what you're saying, that can be defined as rework. Anything that's done within the workplace and then you decide later to not pursue it, that's considered scrap. Obviously, a lot of these come from the manufacturing side of the business, but you can see how there's many ways that this happens, even in tech companies, in any company. It's very industry agnostic. Overproduction. So are you producing more than what is needed or before it is needed? Waiting, obviously waited time. So wasted time waiting. So that's pretty easy. But easy to understand, probably one of the easiest to understand. But you see this in anything. You see this in projects moving forward because you're waiting on something. You see this in tech fulfillment when something's being shipped and they're waiting on some terminal or hardware. There's so many examples of this that can be actually waiting. Non-utilized talent is another type of waste. This is a sort of new development, but no need to go into detail there. It's essentially where you have people talent that's not being used that you know of. So really getting people into the right seats is the way Traction defines it, or using their unique ability. Transportation. So this is obviously unnecessary movements in products and materials. Again, there's a vehicle here, but it's not just transportation. This could be paperwork. This could be if you are in the tech business and you're working with hardware, it could be movement of hardware. It doesn't obviously have to be just a vehicle. Inventory, excess products and materials not being processed, motion, unnecessary movements by people. So you see this a lot in offices where people have to walk around to get to certain people. In the dealerships, we used to do motion studies where we actually tracked where people had to go in order to get the paperwork done that they needed done. And it ended up being that they were walking like 2.5 miles to get one contract done, which sounds crazy, but like if you're not measuring it, you just don't know. And then extra processing. So this is more work or higher quality than is required by the customer. So sometimes you see this in software companies where they offer a lot of add-ons, or they give a lot of extra emails, or they give a lot of extra services per se, but it's like what the customer wants is just a high quality product. The extra stuff is not always so necessary. Or you see that a lot with dealing with client complaints, where, and I'm sure you guys have all dealt with it before, where like you complained about something and they tried to give you all this extra stuff and you're like, no, actually, I just want you to get my smoothie right the first time or something, you know? So that's kind of the idea of doing more than what's necessary for the customer.
So it's not really falling into waste, but where would Lean Six Sigma or Toyota place the risk of someone leaving? Because I feel like a big benefit, and like what I always tell people about why we promote Process Street so much and why we're so process focused and why we suggest to our clients to let us help them with their company processes is, on one hand, it helps to uncover places where there's waste and where people were doing things. You can click buttons and have automation. So do it. So that in one hand falls into this waste bucket. But the other thing that I promote with all this process automation and documentation is the reduced risk of someone leaving and then you don't know how to make payroll or to hire someone. So where's the risk reduction component addressed in the framework of Six Sigma or in Toyota? Or is that kind of not one of the benefits that they promote from being so process oriented?
No, I wouldn't say, this is a great question, actually. I wouldn't say that it's directly related. I would say that they always come back to process, meaning in that sense, your process is HR. So it's like the HR department has a responsibility and a duty of certain outcomes, which is probably around retention, around, employee satisfaction, engagement, some other key outcomes. But within their realm of HR is the process of retention. So I think that's where it's more like, it's not that they don't look at that as waste. It's just, if you're fixing the process of HR, you're documenting and optimizing the processes of HR, using these kinds of philosophies, then you will keep and create retention. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess like instead of framing it as like risk reduction, you reframe the problem that retention is a process in itself rather than a benefit of creating a process is to reduce the risk of someone leaving,
Correct.
to reduce bottlenecks. So I guess you're kind of just reframing it in a different way. But I definitely do consider the risk reduction of having bottlenecks in your company is one of the biggest benefits of going through this. Okay. So I think we lost Hilary for just a second, but does anyone have any right now? If you have any questions, please post it in the channel and we'll address it. I want to shift gears a little bit. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on your view of hierarchy within companies. I'm doing some consulting right now for a very large company, and it's totally, they are trying to be decentralized, and for the most part, they're doing a good job. But I mean, ultimately, there are some decisions that have to get made by a boss, right? But for the most part, they are decentralized, where there's no org chart with top down, and it's much more of like a circle and spoke model versus the traditional pyramid box type of model. And a lot of these philosophies have come from books. Like I'm currently reading Decentralized Organizations. Reinventing Organizations. It's a great book. I just read one called Spider and the Starfish, How to Run a Leaderless Organization. So, Kaizen is great. I'm wondering though, I'm guessing at Toyota, there was hierarchy, there were bosses. What are your views on that? Do you think that there's an opportunity for companies like Toyota to become more decentralized? Would that be a good thing or not a good thing?
So, yeah, great question. I have lots of thoughts on this. Believe it or not, Toyota was actually very flat. It was essentially an EVP, an SVP, and then GMs of the departments. And then from there was like a manager and then entry-level positions. So it was fairly flat. But I mean, looking at positions and organizations as a whole, I think what's beautiful about Kaizen is that it allows the leaders to be leaders, and it allows the leaders to teach the employees to think like leaders. That's the coolest thing. It's really easy to put people in their silo. I see it all the time. I have friends that work all over Facebook, all over the world, and they are put into one position. And that is so clear. And if they don't perform, they're gone within 3 months. The beauty of Kaizen is it allows your people to think like an owner, in the sense that you're thinking bigger picture about how your process affects other processes, and about your own need and personal responsibility to work with other team members. You're starting to think with numbers. A lot of people in entry-level positions or even managerial positions aren't thinking with numbers and outcome-oriented. So when you say, okay, customer complaints are an issue. Okay, well, how are we going to address it? How big of an issue is it? You start to make them to think more critically, which is how a leader thinks. So I'm not opposed at all to decentralizing organizations. I think it's wonderful, and I think that's what Kaizen does. If you do it well and you stay out of your people's way, they will solve your problems. They will come up with solutions. It might not be the perfect answer the first time around, and that's why you're there to help guide them. But if you let your people work for you, they will totally work for you. If you give them the space to test their ideas, they will test them. If you give them the space to then let their ideas fail and don't, attack them for it, like they'll try again. You see it with Google, right? Like Google creates space in the day for people to work on their own ideas, things like that. That's not really like Kaizen, but you were going to say something?
Well, yeah, Google's famous for that 10% time that they give people. So for all those that don't know about how Google works, I guess there's some like common overlap between all these things, but they have something called OKRs, objectives and key results. And when you work at Google, they say you can spend 10% of your, I think it's 10%, right? Or is it 20? I forget the percentage. I think it's 10% you can spend on any side project that you're interested in. And the types of things that have come out of that 10% free time are things that you might have heard of, like Gmail. And I believe like Google Hangouts might have come out of that too, but some cool things come out giving people space.
And that's sort of, yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's sort of the difference between like innovation and process improvement. Because people also ask that question, like, well, where do those overlap? And it's more like innovation comes out of process improvement. But if you don't let your people slow down and think about things thoroughly, they're just going to jump from fire to fire, and they'll get fulfillment out of putting out the fires.
Totally. I mean, yesterday on our weekly exec call, the big topic of the call yesterday was new contractor agreements, right? So we have these very old contractor agreements, and they're outdated. They don't have things like strong enough non-competes. So some of the issues that we've had over the last 6 months is some people left and started stealing people to go to other companies, and we need to have an updated contractor agreement. There was some pushback by some people on the exec team. They're saying, look, I think that this is fine for everyone else, but I prefer to like wait to sign it for something else. So on the call yesterday, I said, look, only externally, like I'll use the word CEO, but think of me as a coach internally. Like I'm not, I don't believe in like being your boss. Like look at me as a resource. If I can be helpful, mentor you, coach you, help you solve a problem, that's where I'm here for. I'm not going to force you to sign anything. This is ultimately your decision, right? Because, if you're trying to make a career out of being in the company, you're at risk, if people, keep getting poached or leave to go to some other, they hear rumors and they go to another company, eventually it's going to impact you. So it's really to protect you. And I hope you view it like that. The only thing that I do kind of want to step in and set a rule for is I firmly believe that you should lead by example and never ask someone to do something that you're not comfortable doing. So I'll never ask someone to work harder than me or to work more hours than me, right? Because I don't think that sets the right precedent. So likewise, I said, I don't think it's right for you to ask someone to sign something you're not willing to sign. So I think it has to be an all or nothing thing, but you decide, right? And then ultimately everyone decided that it was smarter to sign, and they agreed with that. But I kind of just reframed it in a way where I wasn't forcing. I forced this idea that we should lead by example. But other than that, I didn't force on the specifics of signing a contract.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's the point of like why Kaizen can be really beneficial. And obviously reviewing contracts, just the fact that you involved them in that process is the key. And you asked me earlier about like the one thing people don't do, right? And I see all the time is like, you can design beautiful processes all day long, but if the person who owns that process, who does that job every day, is not involved in that process of designing the process, they won't do it. They won't do it. And it doesn't matter if you're in Toyota, in a little tiny dealership in Bangalore, or you're in the US. Human beings are human beings. If they're responsible for the job, they want to be involved. It's just like consulting, right? So if you can go into any company and probably tell them how to do their job better. Probably, right? We all have opinions, no matter what the industry is. But if we walk away after telling them that, what are the odds they're actually going to do what you say? Probably slim to none, because we want ownership. Human beings want to feel like it was their idea, they implemented it, and it worked. And so that's where I see a lot of leaders fail, is they have excellent ideas and they can implement incredible processes, but it's like sort of telling them what to do instead of letting them come to it on their own. Yeah, enrollment versus engagement. That's good.
Which is why now at Leverage, the way that we do accountability is we have a Trello board, which is basically a Kanban system, and people have a backlog, a next week, and a doing this week list. And what we ask is before the meeting, move all the Trello cards to next week that they want to work on next week. And then we kind of steal a little bit from agile software development. We use a Chrome plugin called Scrum for Trello, so you can put storyboard points on it. So we just make a point represent an hour, and we know kind of we've all kind of agreed loosely. We don't use toggle timers anymore to keep track. We're really now based on like a trust system. So if you've committed to 30 hours, you'll put cards in there, put points, how much you expect each one to take. And when you hit 30 hours, then you kind of stop. And now it's really people decide what is the most important things that they should be working on. And it's really more of like the weekly meeting is really more of like a coaching session where, someone's blocked or they want your advice. Like, hey, do you think that I should work on this versus this? But it's really much more, for multiple reasons, for culture reasons, for also, I don't want to be a bottleneck. So if I have to drive all decisions, what happens if I get hit by a bus? Then everyone's screwed. So setting up a company so that, one, they're all accountable and really driving it themselves, I think, to your point, boosts morale and culture because people feel like they're really having ownership, which I think is a key for people. But then two, if I have to skip a meeting 1 week, people already are going through the process by themselves. I think it's really important that the company can run without any particular person, including the CEO. Yes.
Great point. And I think this is where like process documentation comes into play too, is a lot of the books right now are recommending process documentation, whether it's Vern Harnish's book, Rockefeller Habits, whether it's Traction, there's more out there. And that it can be seen as unnecessary for the leadership to make importance on or place importance on. I just did a workshop about a month ago and they were all C-level execs. And of course, they're all male, but besides the point, at first we started and they were like, why do we need to know this level of detail? We're, in our offices, we don't need to understand. Until finally, like halfway through, one guy came to me. He really said in front of the whole group, he said, if we don't understand our process, how can we expect our people to understand our process? And that was the light bulb moment for them. And he said it in front of the whole group. No, do you need to know every single detail? No, but it does need to be documented so that when you want to know something, to be clear, it's not verbal exchange about what people think from different perspectives. It's already been documented. It's already been cleared. And that's one of the core techniques that we talk about in Kaizen is when you put things on paper, it becomes about the operation and not the person. So it's not, well, Jeff does it this way and Annie does it that way and Hilary does it this way. It's like, 6 months ago, we agreed that it looks like this. And of course, Process Street is one of those tools, which is phenomenal. I mean, I don't even think Toyota knows about what Process Street is, but they should.
I just spoke with the CEO yesterday about a bunch of things that we're going to be collaborating on with them. But yeah, cool. It's whether it's that phenomenal tool or another process documentation tool, it's so critical.
Yeah. So then it's about the process and not the person. And that removes so much hostility between employees. It removes waste by not talking about the conversation, about the process over and over again. Like, I see it in so many different companies where they get together, they have this great 1 hour meeting where they talk about the process. They don't document anything. And then a week later, they have to talk about it again and nothing was written down. And so they're starting from scratch again. And that's just another type of waste. So just really, I think the biggest takeaway that the group can take from this today is like, start to look at everything as a process. Your process for taking appointments, your process for how you take phone calls, when you take phone calls, your process for, client success is a huge one, but fulfillment, marketing, sales, hiring, firing, everything is a process. And there is inevitably waste in everything.
And you don't realize, but you literally have hundreds, if not thousands of processes, both in personal and business life. Process could be like one step or two steps. It doesn't have to be like a super complicated process, right? But it's still a process. A story I like to tell is when I was a high frequency trader, I used to have to take a block leave every year. So 2 weeks I had to take vacation where consecutive, 10 consecutive business days where I'm not allowed on the desk or checking email. And that's to make sure that you're not hiding trades. But before you leave, you have to document your process. So how do you start your portfolio? what's going on in the market that people should be aware of, what to do in case of certain scenarios, right? So you have to lay out for someone how to run your book. And every time I came back, even if the person wasn't as good as me at trading or math or whatever, because I'm looking at these things day in and day out, there was always either a small, sometimes maybe a minor tweak, sometimes it was massive tweaks, but nonetheless, there was always an improvement. And that improvement wouldn't have been, we wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't documented, right? Or by documenting it, you're allowing people to rotate and other people to do it, because if it's just verbal, it's easy for details to get lost, especially if it's a complicated thing.
Yes.
So by documenting it, you're really facilitating the ability to have rotations, which allows you to have breakthroughs in ideas of how to improve. Even if it's a 100-step process and you improve one step in there, it's a win.
And that's
right. Because
yes.
If you think like that and you have 1,000 processes, you're going to have 1,000 wins.
Exactly. And that's the big shift, is companies think that Kaizen is like sexy. Like you come in and you make a brand new product, or you cut waste by 50%. And it's like, actually, that's where it gets lost. It's not in the big wins. It's in the small incremental changes and developing the mindset of constantly thinking ahead of how it can be better. And if you get all your people doing that on all levels, that's where the exponential shift happens. Like I totally just got goosebumps. Like, what the heck?
Yeah. So it's like, I could tell people whatever I want on how we operate at Leverage, but Leverage is successful not because I have a line of code that's like an algorithm that matches people up, and if they know that one line of code, it's literally, we have thousands of automations and processes documented that have been optimized, where sometimes each thing might only save literally 3 seconds, right? But it's like death by 1,000 cuts, kind of. It's the sum of all the little things. Yeah. So it's so hard. It would be so hard for someone to replicate what we've built, because there isn't one thing to copy. There would be like thousands and thousands of little things that they would have to know about, and they're all interconnected. So if you miss one step, you're kind of potentially missing like something massive. So anyways, I want to be respectful of your time. Does anyone have any questions? I see Keenan asked something about enrollment versus engagement.
That was when we were talking about getting them to solicit, ideas and be involved in the conversation. I've not heard of those concepts, but I like the words. I'm wondering where they're from. And I will share those 2 PDFs.
So where can people find out more? I mean, we do have plans on having a Leverage retreat, which obviously you would be at and give a talk on Kaizen. But aside from something like that, which is still in the works, what's your website? Where can people find out more if they want to implement Kaizen? What should they do? Yeah,
so I would say as a starting point, visit golean6sigma.com. I can put it in here in the website, actually. Go Lean Six Sigma. See, if I write it down, then mistakes aren't made. GoLean6sigma.com. I've never seen any company do a better job at making training effective, easy, and affordable. Oh, great question. They have, so you probably heard of like white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, things like that. They have trainings for all of those people, but you can start with like a $50 training that will just give you like the cusp of how to start. I would definitely recommend. As far as my contact, you can feel free to stay in touch with me. It's just my name, Hilary, at hilarycorna.com. That's 1 L, not 2. People confuse these days because of the presidency. Or you can visit the website, hilarycorna.com. But I typically work with companies anywhere from half-day workshops to 6-month to 9-month engagements. But I do want to answer this question. Hi, Stephen. How is Process Street different than a BPM system? Will Process Street keep track of status of all processes and queues? Nick, do you want to address that?
Sure. So yes, it will keep track of, I mean, I guess you would say Process Street is a type of BPM system, but the functionality that you get in Process Street is, yes, you can keep track of the status, like where you're at in a process. You can assign different people to different steps. You can not allow people to go out of order, so you can't get to step 4 until step 3. Process Street integrates with Zapier, so you can have automations be triggered. So let's say one of the processes is to hire someone. Maybe you get to step 17, and that step is to send a contractor agreement. So you can just click a button, and via HelloSigns API and Zapier, you can send a contract all pre-filled with the information from step 1. You can do conditional logic. So if they fail at step 4, skip to step 10. But if they pass step 4, go to step 5. So it's just a type of BPM system, Stephen.
But what I love about it, there's a couple of things that you touched on. One, it makes it human error proof. So like, as you go through the process, if you can actually make a box mandatory, so like the process can't go further unless that step is done, which is brilliant. I mean, you can design workflows all day long. And there's software design workflows, but the software that designs workflows doesn't sync with the actual workflow. That's what's funny. So Process Street is brilliant because it's synced with email. It's synced with whatever software you're using so that like the process can't happen. So it's not only documented, but it's actually supporting the automation of the process. I've said process way too many times in this talk. And the other thing I was going to say about Process Street that I love, well, shoot, I forget what it was. So was there something else there, Nick, that you wanted to share? It'll come to me.
So Process Street, I suggest at least the Business Pro account, which is $25 a month. That just has all the integrations and all the customer support and it has conditional logic, which is pretty much like a must-have. And also just in case you're listening and you're a Leverage client and don't know about this, when you sign up for Leverage, you get unlimited enterprise seats for the first year and then a huge discount anything after. Enterprise is normally $60 a month, and you get some even more enhanced features than Business Pro, like API access and some even more special customer support and a few other things. So we believe in process stuff so much. That's why Hilary's the guest today. Mm-hmm. That's why we have the partnership with Process Street. It's really something that will transform fundamentally the way that you operate your business.
Yeah, and I did remember what I was going to say, which is what Process Street allows you to do is make, not only make, well, in Japanese, it's poka-yoke, is human proof or remove human error. But one of the key concepts of Kaizen is the right place at the right time. So a lot of times you'll see in just normal day-to-day operations, like someone reaching out for a file. Well, hey, can I get that file from you? And they're like, well, I'm not going to give that to you until I get this and this from so-and-so. And then that took up 5 minutes, if not more, of a conversation between those two people. And that happens every day between so many people. Whereas if you make it the right place at the right time, and that process is designed in a way that those two people are already aware, you just prevent that wasteful conversation from happening ever. And I will say absolutely that there's a lot of waste still in Toyota. They are new to applying this to the sales and marketing side of the business. And they could benefit from a lot of these things. But I've seen, and Nick can probably attest to this too, I've seen companies that are doing hundreds of millions in revenue that operate so ineffectively with process, where just duplication of work, rework, scrap emails, and all that time is human labor that adds up.
I do a fair amount of consulting, anything from $500,000 a year company all the way up to the biggest I did was a few billion revenue company, and they all have similar problems. None of them are properly documenting process, and then they're like, well, how long will it take for you to come and clean things up? I'm like, look, I'm efficient. In a day, you'll see some improvement. In 2 days, you'll see more. But even at Leverage, constantly we're improving these things. You know, like
Exactly.
we're experts at this stuff, and every day we're spending time on process improvement. It's a never ending thing. So, but you get such a massive return on investment by investing in this exercise.
Yeah. So would say to kind of sum up into next steps, you don't need to document the whole company right away. There's sort of a rule of thumb to document the 6 to 10 core processes of each department. So just start there. And what that means as far as core processes of the department is what has to happen for your company to run. You know, you hire people, you fire people, you service a customer, you fulfill the product, whatever that process is that has to happen for your company to run. Start with those and just get those documented. And then, you know, like Nick was saying, the constant improvement stuff is what happens after something's documented. So just start there. Oh, I can't hear you. Are you muted?
I was muted. I said, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate your time. And I hope people really listen to what you've said, because it's, you know, if you implement what Hilary said, it will change your business. All right. Thanks, guys.
I should get that written as a testimonial.
We'll get you a t-shirt with that printed. All right.
Nice.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. I'll send out those PDFs.
Sounds good.
Thank you.